Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Grober, and the gentleman next to me is James Bartley. His website is cosmicswitchboard.com. He also has a channel on YouTube. Everything will be linked below. He has a background in telecommunications. He also worked in the semiconductor industry. And without further ado, James, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah. So that sounds pretty, solid and down to earth. What your background. I know you also at one point owned your own business. So how did that start for you, going into the field of aliens, interdimensionals, abductions, and so on and so forth?
I've always had an interest in the subject since I was a child. I was always a voracious reader, and things like various phenomena, UFOs, the Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot, other dimensions. And also I was very interested in mythology, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Native American lore. That came later. When I was a boy, I was obsessed with Greek mythology, reading about all the pantheon of the Greek gods and goddesses, and how they would manipulate the human race, and how they would have these half-breed offspring demigods that were half god, half human, and the superpowers they would manifest. When I was reading that as a boy, I never doubted for a second that things like that have happened in the past or are continuing to happen somewhere in the cosmos, if not here, somewhere that is going on. I felt a deep resonance with Greek mythology in particular, and I was always interested in military history from ancient times to modern times, especially nowadays, special operations, covert operations, intelligence, counterintelligence. So having that background and that interest, when I became aware that I was having up close and personal ET encounters, I'd had UFO sightings throughout my life. As a young boy, I'd had missing time experiences. I'd wake up with nosebleeds. I'd wake up in a different part of the house from where I slept. I'd wake up with my clothes on backwards and inside out. And I would have a lot of dreams about UFOs, but I didn't have a context through which to understand it. That only came later. And with me, my experiences were cyclical. I wouldn't have them or seemingly not have them for a few years. Then they would come back, and I would have a lot of experiences. And then the experiences in various forms would linger for a while, and then they would go away. Then they would come back a few years later. So that was my pattern. In 1990, I'd come back from a 3-month language study course in Germany, in the Black Forest, right on the border with Switzerland on the Rhine River. And when I came back, I had a series of UFO experiences and alien abductions, quite frankly. Actually, I feel that leading up to the time when I was going to depart Germany, come back to California, I was beginning to have that symptomology again of feeling like I was being watched, feeling presences. I began to sleep with the lights on again. I began to feel skittish and scared. And then when I came back to California, in just a matter of weeks, this was September 1990, I had a number of UFO experiences culminating in a full-blown bedroom encounter with 3 reptilian greys. It took me up into their ship, and everything just kind of unraveled from there. The next morning, I was a basket case. I was quite traumatized. But over time, what happened was, and it didn't really take long, I wouldn't say my curiosity overrode the fear, but my curiosity and my thirst for knowledge and understanding drove me. We didn't have the internet back then, so it compelled me to go to the bookstores, buy as many books about alien abductions as I could find. And because of my background studying military history, military intelligence, when I came across information that suggested that the US military in particular had recovered crashed alien craft, crashed alien spaceships, and then covertly retrieved the wreckage and the hardware, including living and dead alien bodies, and then began a covert effort at back engineering the technology to weaponize it essentially. Then it began to make sense to me that yes, there's a number of reasons why they're keeping this secret and using ridicule from the media, using academics to debunk the subject, and depending on the circumstances, outright harassment, even targeted assassination. So that's really where it started. September 1990, I had a series of really at sometimes frightening encounters, and that just compelled me to learn as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. So some people say there is no such thing as alien abduction. It's all our military doing it. What say you?
I've heard that before, and I strongly disagree with that because it's in the lore, it's embedded in the lore of traditional peoples all over the world. And even in our Western culture, medieval times back to ancient times, there have been accounts of phenomena in the skies. Alexander the Great talked about seeing flying shields in one of his campaigns. You have stories, I mean, if taken at face value, some of the accounts in the Vedic text, the Mahabharata, and then you look in more of the Abrahamic religions, let's say, the Old Testament and whatnot. It's rife with accounts of aerial phenomena of non-human beings. But then it comes down to the people reporting these experiences. I would direct the listeners to books like The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, written by William Evans Wentz. That book was written in 1909, I think. And then you have The Science of Fairy Tales by E.S. Hartland, that was written in 1899, and a number of other books of a similar genre where they compiled these accounts, these first-person accounts that go back hundreds of years, where people talk about encounters with non-human beings. And the people in those days, they used the language of the vernacular, they used the language of their culture to describe what they experienced. So they wouldn't call some of these beings aliens or greys or mantis beings. They would call them a fae, they would call them a brownie, they would call them a sprite, they would call them whatever name or designation was in common usage in their particular culture. And the parallels are striking. The fae, the fairy, you call them what you will, the gentry, the wee folk in the Celtic countries, just to cite but one example, Scandinavia and also the British Isles. The lore talks about how these little beings would interact with humans, manipulate humans, abduct children, conduct sexual liaisons, relationships with humans. So these stories are not even new. And there's also this notion that suggests that all ships that people see in the sky are merely advanced military craft. That's very much putting the cart before the horse. And again, it bespeaks a profound ignorance, not only about the long history of aerial phenomena and non-human interactions with non-human beings down through the ages, but also what the military, intelligence, scientific professionals were saying, especially from the 1940s onwards, when the human race was just getting its feet wet, if you will, as far as aviation and rocketry and space exploration is concerned. World-class experts like Herman Oberth, who was a rocket engineer who was brought to America, worked at the Huntsville United States Army Missile Development Center and also the Redstone Arsenal facility there. he said that the reason why flying saucers don't emit, I'm paraphrasing here, the reason why they can make these abrupt changes of trajectory, instantaneous right angle turns, was because these craft, many of them, created their own gravitational field. So the implication is the beings in every molecule, every atom inside of the craft are not affected by inertia, are not affected by G-forces. So that's Herman Oberth talking. And then you look at a military professional like General Curtis LeMay, who led one of the bombardment groups in Britain, which bombed the continent of Europe, France, and Germany. Later, he became the commander of the 20th Air Force based in Guam, and it was under the aegis of the 20th Air Force in Guam that they bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki with atomic weapons. He said in his memoirs, which I read, he said, flying saucers are real. Straight up. And those are just two examples. One, a scientific engineering expert of international historical renown, and the other, General Curtis LeMay, who wound up becoming Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Individual. Vice Air Marshal Hugh Dowding. He was commander of RAF Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain. He was the prime mover behind the effort to create what they called the chain home radar defense system. Unlike many people in the Royal Air Force at the higher levels, he looked on radar, the new invention of radar, as something that could benefit the Royal Air Force. It was the Royal Air Corps back then, the Flying Air Corps. But because they had the ability to utilize radar, they could vector their small number of fighter planes towards incoming hostile aircraft. And this is an Air Vice Marshal who was the commander of the RAF Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain. He said, flying saucers are serious business. Moreover, he was particularly interested in accounts of encounters with the occupants of the craft. So not only was he interested, and he took the subject of flying saucers seriously, but he was more interested in the beings piloting the craft, as well as the interactions that these beings were having with people, which was already well known to military intelligence circles in the 1940s, especially the late 1940s. So it's not what I think, it's not what anyone thinks. These are people whose credibility is beyond refute. They cannot be dismissed as crackpots or conspiracy theorists. These are people that commanded air fleets during historic battles, people who commanded the units that dropped nuclear weapons, people that developed rockets and missiles for the US Army.
Okay. Is it possible that it might be a combination of both? That sometimes the military does some abductions to add to the confusion?
The military, deep black elements of the military that are involved with, there are, for lack of a better term, there has been a long-standing liaison, a long-standing alliance, if you will, between non-human life forms and deep black elements of the military intelligence aerospace community. We have in our field a designation, a term for people who are abducted by aliens as well as by the military. We call them milabs or milabs, military abductees, an abbreviation. My definition of a milab is someone who first and foremost is a legitimate alien abductee, but who also on occasion, sometimes quite frequently, depending on their DNA profile, the latent metaphysical powers within their DNA, even their past life karmic profile, and also the for lack of a better term, the ET DNA, contained within their DNA chromosomes structure. Some of these people have usefulness for deep black elements of the military because they're allied with certain ET groups. They know, not all, but they know about many of the people who are having ET encounters. They get this intel not only from the ETs they're in league with, and I would argue that the humans are not necessarily calling the shots here. I would argue that it's quite possible that the humans, the deep black military, aerospace community are the junior partners in this scenario. And they also not only get information from the aliens about who in the civilian population is having ET encounters, and then they will do the follow-up and get the blood work, get the DNA, and they have many means of doing this. And they find out what the DNA profile of this individual is, the potential they have also for metaphysical abilities, remote viewing, astral travel, et cetera, but also because of they've long since understood that some of these alien craft give off certain emissions, sometimes in the microwave bandwidth range. And they have sensors, the military have sensors, which can detect the presence of some of these emissions and some of these energy fluctuations, if you will. So if it comes on their radar, if you will, that, okay, there seems to have been an event in a certain region, a certain part of a city, for example, they can narrow that down and then do a background check on everyone there in that given region. And then they'll pretty quickly come to a conclusion as to who is likely having experiences. And then what they will do is they will put that person under phone monitoring, internet monitoring, computer monitoring, even surveillance, being followed around, what have you, just in case the person has another encounter. And then when they're absolutely certain the person is having ET encounters, they will, on occasion, kidnap that person, utilize various forms of mind control, narcohypnosis, selective memory erasure, externally imposed amnesia. And there have been times, and I know this has happened, that people that I know that are legitimate alien abductees who have had milab experiences, there were times when the military tried to fool them into thinking they were being abducted by aliens, but were not really aliens. It was either a little small person or a child in a gray costume or something, or it was a holographic projection, or it was a cardboard cutout. I've heard a number of different accounts, but the people who relayed these stories to me, first of all, like I said, they were legitimate alien abductees. And there is a difference between alien mind control and military mind control, intelligence mind control. The alien mind control is seamless. We can lapse from a normal state of consciousness or in our sleep state right into an alien controlled virtual environment, essentially, a stage managed dream in our sleep where they literally take over our dream state, or they can put us in a waking hallucination, make us perceive and feel things, because we must remember, when we're temporarily in the presence or under the control of aliens, everything we perceive, we have to question. Everything we feel, we have to question, because the aliens have some of them have a means, the way to alter our senses, alter the way we even perceive and feel things. So the point of relevance is that the ET mind control is much more seamless, much more sophisticated, and it's much more intense, but not in a ham-fisted, heavy-handed way. Whereas the military, civilian intelligence mind control is much more ham-fisted. It's much more blunt force, blunt trauma almost. It's much more blatant. You know that you're at times you know you're being subjected to some form of mind control. You can feel yourself being electromagnetically beamed. You could feel your skin, sensation of heat being generated, directed at you. Whereas with the aliens, it's much more subtle than that.
You mentioned something like stage managed dreams. Is that correct? Um, is that, does that feel like they are broadcasting a dream?
I believe that some of the stage managed dreams, I guess, can be likened to a broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
So many alien abductees have implants in them, physical objects, and they also have energetic implants, which may not show up on a CT scan, an X-ray, or an MRI because it's energetic in nature. It's interdimensional, essentially. And these implants are placed strategically throughout the body, in the brain, in a place to activate and manipulate the endocrinary system, engender the release of certain hormones and certain glands for particular purposes. If it's near the sexual chakra or near the reproductive system, they can be used to engender a sexual arousal response. So it varies. But on the other hand, what some of these beings, reptilians in particular, and Dracos are the winged reptilians, they have, like a lot of these beings do, but the reptilians in particular, they're masters of frequency and resonance. They can alter their density. And what they can do is they can alter their density to the point where they can slip into the body of a sleeping human and essentially take over their dreams from the inside and compel that person who's sleeping to dream whatever it is they want the individual to dream. And it's very stage managed. The person can't just wake up from these things. They're compelled to take part. And the reptilians can, depending on what purpose they have or the form of behavior modification they have in mind, they can eroticize the dream. They can make the person go through a very horrible, nightmarish scenario. They can manipulate the person in various ways to develop phobias about spiders, about heights, about clowns. It varies because it behooves these negative parasitic beings to keep us in a lower vibratory ebb, a lower frequency bandwidth, if you will, because that benefits them. They parasitically feed off us in many ways. They feed off of us emotionally and energetically. And looshing it, absolutely. So it does them no good to allow us or to enable us to be in a state of serenity and peacefulness and happiness and joy. That doesn't feed them. It empowers us, and they don't get a feed off it. It's much easier and much more beneficial from their standpoint to do things to us emotionally, psychologically, behaviorally, supernaturally, if you will, to keep us in this frightened, traumatized, anxiety-ridden state, because we're easier to manipulate and they get a feed off that also. And also from the sexual standpoint, because we are sexual beings by nature. And I'm not just talking about how some of including the reptilians, but a number of other beings, mantis beings, some of the gray factions, etc. And some of these ET groups work in unison with one another. They have these coalitions, these alliances amongst themselves, and they do conduct these hybridization genetic programs between themselves and us, where they seek to draw out the best of us to benefit them, but they also seek to imbue what we would perceive to be onerous negative characteristics that are natural for the reptilians. So we would take it on board, become more reptilian in nature, behave more like them. And because sex is such a big part of our existence, that's another way these beings get a feed off of us, is by manipulating us in the dream state, manipulating us through implants, manipulating us through sexual manipulation. They would like all of us to be sex addicts. They would like all of us to live this hedonistic, orgiastic lifestyle because it gives them a feed. It disempowers us and it opens us up even more to eventual possession. I feel that one of the things that's happening is this gradual possession, if you will, of the whole human race through one degree or another, because the human race collectively has been traumatized endlessly, individually and collectively. And so, you know, nowadays, especially with cinema, especially with the media and everything else, we're just constantly traumatized by bad news. That opens us up. And then you add in the pharmaceuticals, the illicit drugs, everything else, it'll just open us up to more entity possession. And I really believe that CERN, that the 5G and that aspect of it also opens up portals and dimensional stargates, if you will, and extraterrestrial stargates to let even more of these entities in. They'll take up all these people as hosts, because as time goes on, we're going to see a level of lunacy, a level of madness that we've never seen before. And it will be normalized too. It will, some of this stuff is so abhorrent and so obscene, but it will be pushed and promoted as being the norm. And anyone who says otherwise is deemed not just an outcast, but, you know, a perpetrator of a hate crime or something.
So it seems that certain alien groups are monitoring us, surveilling us. Where does that start? Do they even monitor, let's say, our soul codes, our DNA when we are coming into this realm? Does it start there? Or do they take interest in certain individuals after they have incarnated here?
I believe that it's both. There's a question that I have of how so many people wound up getting caught in this cycle of reincarnation and soul harvesting anyway. Granted, there is a blatant, for those who have the eyes to see, depopulation agenda underway. We see that all across the board. But as far as, you know, answering your question, they track people, family trees and bloodlines, multi-generationally. But they also, it seems to me, have some role or influence in the after-death process. And when I say after death, by extension, I also mean they can have some influence in determining the circumstances of when and where somebody is born and what family they're born into. Some of these individuals, you know, sadly, tragically, excuse me, born into these really hardcore entity infested cult type families, if things don't radically change, it's quite possible that some years, some generations down the line, they may be born straight back into perhaps even the very same bloodline family that they were in the last time. And that's just one example. As far as the rest of the population is concerned that have these experiences, not necessarily to that extreme, but because they track families generationally, because of the long-standing genetic hybrid manipulation, which again, going back to the beginning of this discussion, you know, the fairies, the fae, the wee folk, the gentry, they've all had this obsession with human reproduction. They've all had this obsession with sexual liaisons with human females and, you know, the offspring that result from that. Call them changelings, call them demigods, call them what you will, right? But this notion of this crossbreed hybrid variant between these entities and ourselves is well embedded in the lore. So I do feel that to some degree we have some choice in the matter, that maybe in that bardo state between lives, we can look at our options. Okay, like I've got 3 potential families I can be born into that I've had karmic ties with each one of these bloodlines. And then I guess if you have the means to do so, you choose a family to be born into that will give you the leg up, give you the best possible means to make a difference in this world, the best possible means to develop a sense of self-worth, sense of identity, a greater awareness and understanding of what's going on. And a lot of us, you know, and I went through this, we kind of question why we were born into a certain family. And some people kind of rue the fact they were born into a certain family. We all have to make, you know, those are the cards that have been dealt to us. And at some level, we chose to incarnate into a certain family. So we have to make the best of it. So I do believe that even before conception, even before we were cycled back into this earthly plane, I do believe they're aware, the good beings and the bad beings, they're aware that, oh, you know, Judith is coming back.
Oh
Get ready,
shit.
you know. She's coming. You see. And what they
And
do,
here comes James.
here comes James, you know. It's like a game of cosmic chess, Judith, where, okay, well, you know, we can't stop this soul from incarnating into this family.
Mm.
And we see the potential that this family has and the connections this person will make throughout life because of geographically where he or she is born and the potential, the networking, the options and opportunities that exist down the track. However, we can surround this person with as many narcissists, as many perps, as many psychopaths, right? As many freeloaders and mooches and users as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even within one's own family, one's, you know, nuclear family, we can just put all these narcissists in there. And then at key points, key junctures throughout that individual's life, they can try to slot other people in, you know, people that have like illicit drug use issues, people that have, you know, this hang up or that hang up, because we bring this karmic, traumatic, I don't want to say baggage, but these issues with us. And also what Bernard Gunther talks about, what he refers to as soul, the entrapments of soul agreements, that by deception or willfully or by externally imposed force in previous incarnations, we've done things, we've made agreements, willingly, tacit or otherwise, that have given these entities, these forces, and the hybrid minions they work through here on the surface and below the surface, it gives them the opening to manipulate us and do things to us. So we have to work through all that. The trauma we bring with us from previous incarnations, you know, the good points and the bad points, but also the traps of agreement that we've made in our previous incarnations. It's a process of disconnecting, shutting down, disavowing. You know, I don't agree to anything that was imposed on me by force or by deception or by manipulation. That's one thing that I can say that I want and will have no part of. The times in my previous incarnations when I have made poor choices and did things out of greed and selfishness and, you know, a lust for power or whatever, well, those are things I have to work through. And that's my karmic issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Looking back on my life, I have to say the derailment program sets in very early on. And it worked pretty good for quite a while. But yeah, not the entire time. So what happens if we decide, no, I'm done, I'm not going back?
I think that we should have that option, right? I feel that, and this is where my feelings about this may differ with some others in the field, people who I highly respect, actually. But, you know, but we're not all the Borg. We don't all have to think alike. And so each one of us, it's our sovereign right to have our own set of beliefs that at this particular juncture resonates and works for us. I do believe that we should have the option of not coming back here. I do believe that at some level we've been injected into this soul reincarnation, soul harvesting program, because many of us actually recall incarnations on other star systems in higher dimensions, quite frankly. So, and there's this notion that's very common in the New Age. Oh, once you ascend to the fifth dimension, all's good. It's just one never-ending champagne cruise, right? No, there's spiritual warfare and there's conflict in the fifth, sixth dimension, and probably higher. We just happen to be, I mean, I believe, for what it's worth, and I'm not digressing, it is germane to the discussion, that I think we're already in the fourth dimension as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
But what's happened is, even when we were ETs in other star systems and even in higher dimensions, we still had to deal with all this karmic baggage, all these cosmic wars, dealing with issues of mind control, slavery, cult abuse, call it what you will, all of it rolled up into one. And then eventually, it seems like we were kind of funneled into what seems to be a big vortex, the Saturn Moon matrix vortex, where we can't seem to, we have endless reincarnations here, with oftentimes very little memory of what's gone on, so we can't remember. Because of the soul entrapment karmic issue, we make these mistakes, we make poor choices, we do things to others that we shouldn't have done, but we lack the memory of that, and then we take it all on board when we come back. It's like someone is keeping track of these things, right? Where on the other hand, and this, I'm not going to say it's unfair, right? No two things in life, have an equal chance, right? At least in this dimension. But it seems to me that some of these negative parasitic beings and the hybrid, plantation managers they work through on this planet, they almost seem to be off the karmic wheel. It almost seems like they can get away with almost anything. Because maybe one could look at it, okay, well, if this system doesn't change, it may go through, slight changes or variations over time, but essentially to be the same system, they'll just come back as another evil person, and really that's their punishment. Well, they may not see it as a punishment. It's not much of a punishment if they're another powerful, omnipowerful, manipulative, deceitful being who has the power to influence and manipulate and make others suffer, right? It may, for what's left of their soul, it could be a punishment, but they're certainly not learning and they're certainly not progressing. Whereas for people like us, who are trying to make a difference, who are trying to detach from this, we have all this unseen karmic baggage that we have to learn on the fly and over time divest from ourselves. And so to answer your question, I believe that at some point, I'm not a Pollyanna about this, Judith. I don't say this in an elitist sense by any means, but one has to do the inner shadow work. One has to do a lot of the work. And there's no such thing as a free lunch in this. This notion that, we can just lead this mass jailbreak, everyone will be free. No. When you're surrounded by matrix sentinels everywhere you go, who just endlessly parrot whatever the consensus narrative or propaganda or mind control of the day is. I was saying on another talk show last week that my neighbors and my landlords, they always want to come around and spray Monsanto on me, right? We want to go in your backyard and by your clothesline and spray weed killer, right? Those are matrix sentinels. And it does no good trying to explain to them it's carcinogenic, class action lawsuits. It's pointless, right? So the point of relevance is, I'm not saying they don't deserve to break free of this karmic cycle. Everyone has the right to do so if they so choose. they haven't earned the right from as far as I'm concerned, because they haven't thrown the blinders off, and they're still wittingly or unwittingly matrix sentinels, agents, Will Smiths of the system.
Mm.
So they haven't earned the right, as far as I'm concerned, to break out. I think that a lot of people will break out of this. And then when they do break out of this cycle, then they will have the option. But we'll come back on our own terms. Okay, I'll come back to Earth in a Stargate or a spaceship, or I'll old-fashioned way, I'll just reincarnate again into a family and friends and loved ones that I've known in the past. But we'll do it on our terms. Instead of, well, there's two families I can reincarnate into. One is really bad, one is not so bad, right? I'll take this one because I have more opportunities, however slim, however, token these opportunities may be. I'll make the best of it, right? Because essentially, and I don't want to, sugarcoat this in any way, because it's gotten to the point now that people really need to understand this is not just surface level. Agenda 21 is just not the EU, is just not any of that. We're talking about the ultimate prize, the ultimate disposition, the ultimate destiny of our souls. And one has to do the internal work, make their inner shadow an ally instead of an adversary, where it's constantly pulling the rug out from under you, constantly making you react and project and act out in ways that normally, under normal circumstances, you wouldn't. Find out what your hot buttons are. Find out what the hot buttons are that trigger you to behave and act in certain ways and certain circumstances. And that's a lot of work. And just sitting around and saying, well, I'm going to ascend to the fifth dimension. And that's not going to do it, because the fifth dimension is full of spiritual warfare. So is the sixth. Who knows how high up dimensionally these spiritual conflicts are being waged, right? So it starts with the first circle, us. We have to work on ourselves before we can even presume to want to help anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say personally, I've become very rigid when it comes to shutting out these matrix
sentinels.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people might even say brutal, but I close all doors. I don't have time for that nonsense.
Me neither. Because what happens is, if you're dealing with someone who clearly has not been making an effort to sort out their issues and sort out their challenges, and karmically, they're challenged, and then you add on the archontic element. And what I mean by archons is, it's a catch-all generic term to describe parasitic beings of all stripes, interdimensional, subterranean, extraterrestrial, all points in between, because we represent a feed to them. Some of these beings, many of them are non-corporeal in our dimension. So they strive to, at the very least, malignly influence us to engender certain behaviors, certain outcomes, usually putting us in a very low vibratory psychological state and the emotional physical state, which benefits them, doesn't benefit us. Worst case, we're opened up so much through manipulation, obsessive compulsive thought disorders, which these parasitic entities are behind, right? Because in the spirit world, thoughts are things, and a lot of these entities are constantly putting thoughts into us, constantly trying to inculcate certain behaviors and habits and compulsions within us, get us into that R complex, reptilian complex of ritual, of habit, right? Where we're not even thinking anymore, we're just kind of robotically doing. So when we open ourselves up to that level, and also pharmaceuticals, you throw in all the rest, that opens us up for these entities to seamlessly, what I call the interface, where our vibratory frequency is so low, it allows these entities to comfortably merge with us. And at that point, we're no longer driving the ship. We may think we are. The thoughts sound like our thoughts because it sounds like our thought voice, but the behaviors and the self-sabotage and the poor choices what have you, the lethargy, the inability to make decisive, meaningful change, or even take actions to help us, propel us in a certain direction, just paralyzed by indecision, which itself is a form of manipulation. We have to be wary of all that. We are creators by nature. We are doers. We are instigators. We can work with this divine matrix, as Greg Braden called it, and bring out positive outcomes in our lives and in the lives of those we care about. And I liken it to being on assignment, Judith. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm surrounded by matrix sentinels all the time.
Yeah.
And it's they have their destiny and I have my own. I say that not in an elitist sense, but I recognize, at least to some degree, the multiple threat environment in which we reside and how high the stakes are. So when one has that level of awareness, yes, you're very careful about who you let into your life, who you associate with, the places you even go to, right?
Yeah. You mentioned the hybrid plantation management. What would you say? What are some of the representatives? Would our political system be part of that?
Absolutely. Anything that is limits us, limits our freedom of expression, limits our capacity to experience joy and contentment and fulfillment, and limits us in so many different ways through laws, through all this political manipulation. And also you add in, and to me, I'm just still amazed that religion still to this day can have such a pervasive and profoundly malign influence on people's lives. But we must remember that this has all come about over countless millennia. I believe that our solar system, not just our planet, but our solar system, is subject to cyclical, celestially driven cataclysms. It's in the fossil record. It's in the geological record. A number of times, seemingly every 9 to 12,000 years, and we're right on the cusp of these again, because in geologic terms, 12,000 years is like last week. It's a blink of an eye. Great civilizations, advanced civilizations on the surface come and go. I believe that in the wake of the last celestially driven cataclysm, when some advanced civilizations with the means left before they could be harmed, others, for whatever reason, chose to stick around, they got pretty much eradicated. There's plenty of archaeological proof of their existence. It's just hidden in places like the Smithsonian and the Vatican and things like that. And with this relatively small number of survivors after the most recent celestially driven cataclysms, the reptilians and other parasitical archontic beings had fewer people to have to work through, fewer bloodlines. It was easier for them to work through genetically hybridize the survivors on the surface in a way that suited their agenda, because these beings, they exist beyond linear time. They can kind of see the beginning of the parade, they can see the end of it. Whereas us, we're kind of stuck, at least for the time being, for the most part, in this flat field time effect where we're kind of on a linear treadmill in a way. These beings have a way of surmounting time and not be constrained by linear time. So they know that if they manipulate, if they imbue their genetics and imbue their genetics for the purpose of allowing their consciousness, their souls, if you want to call them that, to incarnate into these bloodlines. So, you and I, or someone out there, could perceive someone, oh, that person, that politician is an evil person. But the consciousness within that politician or that financier or that academic that's pushing all this stuff, it's not human. It lacks empathy. It's patently evil. It's profoundly evil. But from our perspective, from its perspective, and from the cultural milieu, if that's the right pronunciation, of the species that it's coming from, it's doing the right thing. It's very subjective, right? And it's a parasitic thing where we're being farmed. They need us. We don't need them. You know, without us, they don't have a slave force. They don't have a subject population in which they can manipulate and do things to. So over time, they manipulated the small group of survivors, and then out of that, they created priesthoods. It was all very patriarchal. Systematically, they began wiping out on the surface as many of the matriarchal, feminine, divine feminine goddess principle cultures that existed. Many of the Native American ones, for example, were based on the divine feminine, and many of them were eradicated. They also changed the language, the written language, from symbol language, which speaks to us at a soul, very deep level, to an alphabet language, which is left-brained. You would have the high priest, and all that type, the clergy. They would be the ones to educate, if you will, indoctrinate these dogmas into us. And remember, for centuries, people, at these Latin masses, the people attending the services couldn't even understand or let alone write and read Latin. They were just being preached to an entirely different language, right? Complete with all of its rituals and everything else. So you change the language, you change it from a symbol language to an alphabet language that lumps us into the left brain. You fill us with all these dogmas. Science has become a religion, and so much of science is bogus today. So over time, what you do then is, through selective breeding on their part, they maintain the purity of their bloodlines. The same entities can endlessly reincarnate into their bloodlines. Whereas for the rest of us, we're taught that psychic ability doesn't exist. We're taught that all this nonsense from all this organized religion, and increasingly what we're seeing in the political and the mainstream front is absurdity after absurdity after absurdity, because the children today, with the things they're being taught, right, indoctrinated with, have nothing to do with learning, have everything to do with grooming these children. Because openly, what's happening is it's like Babylon revisited, Judith. It's going back to a time when this is the way it was back then. We're going to make it like that now. We control the media, we control Hollywood, we control the music industry. You're seeing these drag queen strippers in libraries stripping in front of children. What's that got to do with reading? What's that got to do with? It's got nothing to do with that. And because of the manipulation of these children, how their hormones are being manipulated, how their personalities are being manipulated. When parents go to these educators, so-called, and these school administrators and say, well, what you're doing here is appalling, they don't even try to deny it. They just say, oh, yeah, what's your point? That's what we're doing. Nothing you can do about it. So what I'm saying is, Judith, it's become a norm. They've created this consensus narrative, this norm, which they're gradually painting everyone into a corner through what is considered acceptable, what is considered offensive. And confusion is a psychological warfare tactic. So when you confuse people and you subject them to endless traumas and make it so that they're even afraid to speak out for fear of offending somebody, right? They're just going to present everyone with a fait accompli. No, we've been doing this all along. This is who we are. This is what we are. Get over it. And by the way, we're shortening your lifespan anyway. So in a few years, you won't even be around to complain about any of this stuff. Because we are seeing a culling, like I said, and it's a good point to leave this first segment with. these psychically, celestially driven cataclysms are coming back. So there's a celestially driven timetable. These beings, they have to affect everything, get everything in place before these cataclysms come back, because that's the great reset. And the Hopi talk about this, you know, the end of the fourth world, the great cleansing and whatnot. So they want to ensure that they get everything in place, so when this big celestially driven event or events come and wipes out most of the surface population again, which has happened a number of times, they will be in a good position when the earth settles into its new axis or whatever, the land masses settle. They can begin this whole thing anew again, right?
Yeah.
But this time, when people come back, because of, you know, the absorption of all the heavy metals in all these people through food and everything else, and breathing in the, you know, the heavy metal laden skies and everything else, that facilitates the recycling. That will make it, because a friend of mine, Barbara Bartley, my mentor, the person who taught her hypnotherapy, did these future progressions on people. And it turned out in almost every instance in a future incarnation, these people lived in a polluted world. Everyone lived under domes. There was no more joy or, you know, much emotion anymore. Everyone was just smart enough to run these machines and computers. And they're all plugged into this big Borg-like system. And basically that's what we see. It's a possible scenario. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but because we can't change it. It's not written in stone. So that's the point I'd like to leave in this first segment. It's not written in stone.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was very good. And yeah, we'll take a short break and we will be back. So we are back. And I just wanted to say, yes, if you leave out that element of non-human beings, you will never fully comprehend what's going on here. And when I hear nonsense like, oh, Trump is working against the globalists. Yeah, boys and girls, you might want to think about that again. Because I read an article yesterday. It's a little bit older article, but the title was something like, global governance will come either by conquest or consent.
Yes.
So, and in this article, they talked about how these nation states will give over their sovereignty to the UN. And then there was one sentence that pointed out America first. Okay, and that is one of the sentences that he likes to use all the time, America first. So maybe he is talking about something else. I'm not saying it will be 100% like that. I'm just putting it out there. Think again. Because no, not Putin is your savior, not Trump is your savior, no savior coming. End of story.
It's savior programming that has been inculcated into so many people, even in the so-called truth movement. These people have this savior programming. Oh, it's the white hats, this nebulous kind of term, these unknown, unseen people out there that are blowing up the underground bases and you know, killing all these evil people. Maybe, maybe not. I don't think so. I'm not going to hang my hat on that, right? And same with the politicians. Oh, Trump is different. It's part of that programming, Judith. And really, you know, all I could do is shake my head and hope the best for these people, because
yeah. And these are exactly those types that I shut out. Can't deal with that.
Yes, because they'll never get to that very basic level of understanding, because they've even said publicly many times that the state religion of the United Nations, of the New World Order, is essentially Luciferian, is Lucifer. They've said this on a number of occasions, right? And then you look at some of the iconography and the symbolism of the Vatican. They've got this big hall in in Rome somewhere, or the Vatican.
With
On the
that
outside,
reptilian?
a big giant reptile on the outside, a
Mm-hmm.
serpent's head on the inside, on the, behind the podium where the Pope or whoever sits, or the Director
Mm.
General, they got this big reptile thing there, right? So
Yeah.
it's in everyone's face. And what's interesting too, Judith, is how does Catholicism hold together when they've had so many scandals? In fact, the whole concept of pedophilia was almost normalized by
Mm.
all the exposure of all these different priests, and how they just do the shell game where they just move them from one place to another so they could molest more children. And like the Archbishop of Australia, the highest ranking Catholic priest, George Pell, was a pedo. He did it for decades, right?
Mm.
But and now, on the other hand, the educational system is promoting it. So it's almost like the twain will meet at some point where they want this to come out, because they're not being brought to justice. All these high level perps, Jeffrey Epstein, I don't think he committed suicide. I don't think he's dead. He's out there somewhere.
Mm. On a nice island, sipping cocktails.
Yeah, the Billionaire Bad Boys Club, as they
Yeah,
call it.
probably. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think so too. Can I prove it? No, no. Can we freely investigate it? No, of course not. We just have to believe what they are willing to tell us. So I don't even bother.
And the point of relevance, Judith, is these people who insist on only seeing it as bad people. First of all, they're assuming that these bad people are anything remotely similar to themselves, right? It doesn't dawn on them. Okay, they can accept, like some of these elite, they're Satanists and they're cannibals and what have you. But it doesn't sink in. Okay, who are they worshiping? Who are they praying to? They're not praying to other evil humans. Sure, it's a hierarchy, but they're not going to pray to themselves. There's something else that they're drawing their power from. There's something else that they're paying homage, and they're doing all these horrible things in the name of and feeding of, right?
Mm.
It doesn't sink in that, and they think that everything is just symbolism, and it's very real to these beings. I mean, there are monsters among us, and they're in front of us in a TV screen. If people could peel back the layers and see what they're really like, they'll realize that everything they've ever been told, everything they've ever been taught, is a lie.
Yeah. So now, when I listen to your show, I like that intro so much, and I have to ask you about something that is being said in that intro that resonates with me very much. And it says something like, now more than ever, it is time for us to tap into our cellular memory. So, what is cellular memory, and why is it important to tap into that?
Our DNA are transceivers. They're senders and receivers of information. They're crystalline in nature, and I believe that they're also portals. It could be portals to like a higher dimension, or a portal to a lower dimension, or both, because you have a quite complex DNA structure. Let me give you the inverse, the opposite negative aspect of that. These negative beings, through their long-term genetic manipulation of certain bloodlines, and in certain cultures, entire cultures, it's extremely pronounced. Okay. This is why, for example, the Pakistani culture is just rife with pedophiles and rapists, and that's just one example. And how certain religions, Islam, for example, and also, quite frankly, the Talmud, Kabbalah, all that is all based on pedophilia. Because of the predisposition in the genetic structure of these individuals, and people need to remember that behavior follows psychology. Psychology follows neurology. Neurology follows genetics every time. It's a process. So if they're part of a bloodline that has been malignly influenced by these beings for a long time, and if religions were foisted and inculcated into these cultures, whether it's some of the voodoo cultures from Africa or the Caribbean, or whether it's Islam or Sharia, whatever the case may be, or Kabbalah and the Talmud, not only is there a genetic predisposition, but also a psychological, neurological predisposition. But the DNA itself holds information. It holds information, and it resonates at certain frequencies. And the DNA, we are fractals of ourselves. We have counterparts, Judith, who could be doing this exact show in an alternate reality, like we're doing now, right? So it's not only just that we have to reintegrate with in a linear time sense, our past life incarnations. Just take the best from our past life incarnations, even in incarnations when we were not even really good people, right? There are lessons learned, strategies, tactics, skill sets that we can carry forward to help us in our current struggle. It's not only healing and reintegrating with our past lives in a linear sense, but our counterparts in parallel dimensions, alternate realities, our extraterrestrial versions of ourselves, if you will. And that all comes down to DNA, because we are the sum of all our parts in a fractal sense, where the smallest part of us is representative of the whole. So if, in our example, somebody has had past incarnations in the Sirius system, in the Orion system, in the Lyran system, that is still encoded in their DNA profile and in their energetic profile. It's still there. And the deep black military and the negative ETs, they know this, because they will abduct that person. They have a way of engendering the manifestation of metaphysical powers within an individual that the person may not even be consciously aware of. Oh yes, the military abducted me. They made me astrally travel. They made me remote view. They made me do all these things. I wasn't even aware I could do these things. Well, that's an object lesson there, because our biggest mystery is figuring out, understanding ourselves. So when we reintegrate and we heal and we draw out the best of what we already have latent within us, then we could be like I talked about Greek mythology in the first segment. Every one of us has within us the potential to manifest fantastic metaphysical powers. It's within our DNA structure. It's some of our counterparts in alternate realities are a little further down the track, a little more advanced, a little more powerful than we are right now. I kind of think that, and I don't mean this in a glass half full sense, but I think that in our reality, our particular reality seems to be one of the worst of the lot. So we have more handicaps, more challenges to overcome, but the greater the struggle, the greater the prize, right? So I believe that if we look at it from the standpoint how these negative beings can tap into us at a DNA level, inculcate all these bad things in us, inculcate all these bad behaviors, all these bad psychological behaviors, et cetera, it's equally possible and quite likely that beings that were descended from star systems that were maybe in conflict with the reptilians or the mantis beings or the gray beings, some of the grays, we still have it within us, where our extended family in those distant star systems, we still interact with at some level. They still take us every once at a higher dimensional level. When we go to sleep, we can still interact with them, and they don't see us as, oh, like Steve the Earthling. It's like, no, this is, we call him by our own name because he's basically one of us. He's on Earth assignment. Somebody had to volunteer to go through all the reincarnation and be stripped of all your memories, and so when you look at it from that standpoint, they go to all these efforts to inculcate us into thinking we're powerless, we're weak. It traumatizes endlessly, lifetime after lifetime. With this, what passes for a medical system, they constantly sicken us. If they're going to go to that much trouble, Judith, how powerful are we really? What potential power do we have within us? So when we can tap into that cellular memory, then I believe, with the proper healing and the reintegration, not only can we heal ourselves in a linear sense, our past life incarnations that we brought forward into this incarnation, right? The trauma and all that stuff, but also reintegrate with our counterparts in other realities, other dimensions, other star systems. And once we do that, nothing will stop us. Well, we can really go a long way towards ending this paradigm here.
Yeah. So in other words, tapping into our genetic memory will not happen without inner work.
I don't believe so, no. And I don't mean endlessly meditating either.
Yeah.
Meditation works for some people, but some people don't need meditation, quite frankly. Some people, and there's something to be said of stilling the mind, shutting down the internal, dialogue and,
The monkey mind.
Yeah, the monkey house, the chatter that goes on. There's something to be said, the value of that. Because then we'll know when a stray thought pops in that belongs to us or doesn't belong to us. But that's a paradigm that we don't have to adhere to. There are other ways that we could, derive that inner solitude and that solace. Excuse me. There's other ways to do it. There's not only one way. So I believe that it's going to take a lot of work, and we just have to be forgiving of ourselves, be good to ourselves, own up to our mistakes. And then just going forward, I'll always, every day, try to do at least one thing to better ourselves and enhance our future prospects.
Yeah. From where you are standing now, I mean, we are all a work in progress, more or less. But to your best understanding, would you say that Earth is, let's say, an alien enterprise and is being run like that, even if it's not about paper money and silver and gold?
Yes, and the whole issue of the monetized debt system, some researchers refer to it as, the Babylonian banking system, and that's a very good way to describe it. There's this alchemy of how they use terms to describe something that in our world, water is the giver of life, right? Banks, currency, right? These are terms that describe water, but they, in an alchemical sense, they've indebted everyone except themselves. That's a neat trick if you can do it, right? So, and of course, the next stage would be a digital currency system. So, when you're talking about, okay, just rephrase the question again.
If Earth is an alien enterprise.
Oh yes, yes. The religions, the indoctrination system passes for education, the bogus science. Yes, everything militates against this being a planet run by purely human beings, because if you were to treat an animal like this, you would be considered an animal abuser. And also the way that the earth itself is being violated, the dioxins, the contaminants in every single, it's like they literally don't care about this world because they're terraforming this world. There's a term they've been using for some time because of all the chemtrailing called global dimming.
Yeah.
And because the atmosphere is so saturated with these chemtrails and the heavy metals and other things in the chemtrails, we have this perma-chemtrail haze in many places where, life-giving photons from the sun that barely make it to the surface anymore. And even when they get to the surface, the soil is so contaminated with aluminium and heavy metals and everything else and radiation. So if the amount of visible sunlight has been significantly reduced, that doesn't benefit us, but it's going to benefit someone else. And also the background radiation count too. You look at like Fukushima, you look at all these leaky nuclear power stations and all the pollution in the wake of the production of nuclear and thermonuclear weapons. So many of these places where they've developed nuclear weapons and the fissionable material for the nuclear weapons, they're uninhabitable. Uninhabitable places like Hanford, Washington, and places like Savannah River, and other places are so polluted. So clearly, whoever the custodians of this world is, the ones who created these religions, for example, they cannot, by definition, be human, because if they were human, they wouldn't be doing this to ourselves. They wouldn't be artificially truncating, shortening our lifespan. When we read accounts from the old days, and they talked about the immensely long lifespans of these people, and now the lifespan has been so radically reduced, and it's illness plague lifespan. It's not just like people live and then they grow up and then they die around 80 years old or 90. It's like they're sick most of the way through. And again, from a supernatural, energetic standpoint, it behooves these beings to keep us in that state where we're physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually always sick. Because it's like, we're being farmed. It's just how farmers in these big corporate farms, they pump all these hormones into the cows, so they get all big and bulky and steroid ridden, and they produce all this milk and all these chickens in their factory farm cages. Totally unhealthy situations for them. That's what's happening to us. But by reducing our lifespan to the state it's in now, the length it is now, it facilitates that whole recycling process. So there's no doubt in my mind. And also the moon, the Saturn moon matrix, everything is in sixes, a sexagesimal system, 60 seconds, 60 minutes. It just, the numerology, the astrology, everything has been set up in such a way to create this kind of closed system, if you will, right? So what we are system busters. Those of us that have the innate ability to hop dimensions, when we're sleeping, when we're dreaming, go dimension hopping, and sometimes pop into alternate realities, whatever the case may be, because of our innate metaphysical abilities. And remember, some of the military and the negative aliens, they know how to activate, if you will, these latent metaphysical powers within many people. Mm-hmm. They cannot consciously, in many cases, do. They may have a fraction of these abilities. They may be in their waking consciousness, like a psychic or something like that, gets paid with clients and all that. But they are only operating at a fraction of their full power. But the military and the aliens that are manipulating them seem to be able to engender these abilities. So again, it gets back to remembering who we are, our innate power, healing and reintegrating, and then going on from there.
Would you say there are certain dangers connected to that? Let's say the military brings online a whole bunch of people that haven't done a shred of inner work, have no clue who and what they are, and then all of a sudden they take them online?
Well, we kind of see that already, because back in my day, when we were first coming to grips with the fact that some alien abductees, and I've had MyLab experiences too, I've had many MyLab experiences. Some of us were not only having the alien element, which is bad enough, but this deep black covert military element where they're training us, they're utilizing us in various ways, they're basically using us as slaves. And what they've done is, through mind control, through fostering and promoting, subtly and not so subtly, certain people of a rather narcissistic bent, let's say, to the point where these people are going on Gaia TV, they're going online, proclaiming themselves to be super soldiers, right?
Yeah.
So notice the terminology. In my day, we were outraged over the fact that deep black elements of the military, who in theory are supposed to be protecting us, are kidnapping us, mind controlling us, torturing us, using us as slaves, essentially, to advance their agenda, which, as I've already pointed out, is absolutely inimical to the survival of the human race. So when you come across these Corey Good types talking about being, like a super soldier and being this liaison, UN representative for all these different aliens or whatever his story
The
is,
blue chicken cult, yeah.
It not only adds confusion to the mix, but it adds this level of distortion and confusion, which only benefits, because again, confusion is a psychological warfare technique, and it only benefits people who have their spiritual alignment intact. They don't get really confused by a lot of things, because like animals in the wild that are aware of the nature of the multiple threat environment in which they reside, they look for any clues in their environment which suggest they may be in danger. And it's not just like a scent or a sound, it could be something much more subtle, much more energetic than that. Whereas humans, they just, they're so unaware, right? So this notion that, the blue chicken cult, when you listen to people like him, he acts like he's never even been under mind control. He puts himself at the epicenter of all these events, right? Like he's some kind of a superhero. That only feeds into the narcissism and the paranoid fantasies of a lot of other people. And it doesn't facilitate healing. It doesn't facilitate reintegration. It doesn't do anything to help dismantle this paradigm. And so, that more than ever, people need to be discerning. And there's also this problem, what I call information constipation, where people go online to YouTube and they watch and listen to an endless number of podcasts. By this point, if they trust their inner guidance, they shouldn't have to listen to a whole podcast to decide, okay, is this person telling the truth? And even if they are telling the truth, what relevance does this person's information have for me, right? In what I'm trying to accomplish? Because we should have some viable, strategic, obtainable goals that we have in mind, short, medium, long term, right? I mean, does listening to the blue chicken cult, will this help me in that direction, right? So, but because of the shame-based nature and the trauma-based nature of so many people, Judith, it's like, well, I'll hear him out. Everyone's entitled to a viewpoint. He means well. See, those are all slave kind of, mentalities. Instead of, no, there's nothing here for me. I'm moving on. And also, they need to trust their internal guidance, that their guidance will point them to the information they need. Instead of sifting through, like grabbing a handful of sand and going through every grain, right? Instead of doing that, just trusting. And again, for people like myself, who, shame-based, wounded inner child upbringing, right? Who did not trust my own senses, did not trust my own judgment for a long time. Very difficult, it takes a lot of work. After a time, your confidence in yourself and your innate inner guidance will draw the information to you that you need, right? To help you at that moment develop a greater level of awareness. So that's what I mean by information constipation. There's so many people, Judith, they pay for a consult for this fraud. They pay for a consult with that fraud. They go to this conference, they do these group meditations, and they're just providing a big feed to these archons, and they're not helping themselves. And what they're doing, they're turning themselves into a non-player. They're taking themselves out of the equation, right?
Yeah. So you already touched on it, savior programming. Would you say that that is a very important step in our personal development, to drop that subject once and for all? Not only in politics, religion, just basically everywhere you turn, you can come across a savior programming.
It's even prevalent in the ET field, where all these
Yeah.
new, you know, these fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, excuse me, dimensional ETs are going to come and, you know, pull their chestnuts out of the fire, right?
Mm.
And they don't realize it, but over time, Judith, just how, like, you know, in this unlimited mass immigration, the immigrants come and then, you know, they already have a sense of entitlement anyway, that then they give them a mobile phone, they give them a laptop, they, you know, they give them everything, right?
Mm.
They create this huge enclave where they start coming up with their own laws and their own rules. It's a sense of entitlement. Now, what they've done, because of the socialization, for lack of a better term, going back in America at least as far as the four terms of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when probably, you know, more than most American presidents, he had the most to turning America communistic because of his policies. The term New Deal came from a Jewish public relations guy in FDR's administration named Sam Rosenman. He's the one that came up with the term, the New Deal, right? And so from the 1930s on, it's just been this handout mentality where people think that all they got to do is do the absolute minimums, and the government, someone will provide for them. It's created this freeloader mentality where there's always going to be someone to take care of them, always someone to help them out when they need help. And we came from a society in America where the term rugged individual was in common use in the old days, where people, you know, they carved out an existence in the frontier. You know, they lived amongst animals. They lived in the woods. They were very self-sufficient, very hardy, to the point where the people today are very dependent all across the board. I mean, you take away, or someone forgets to bring or misplaces their mobile phone, it's the panic and the anxiety that it hits some of these people. It's like they've just lost a limb or something, right? So the point of relevance is getting back to the savior programming is, and even how it applies to the UFO field, where all these New Agers think these aliens are going to come and rescue us. It's this divesting of power, which they've been taught over time, that someone else will come along and do all the work. And all I have to do is sit back, collect my welfare checks, right? Just collect my food stamps. And in America, what they're doing, because we talked earlier about how America's America number one, right?
America first, yeah.
America first, because of the unlimited immigration, what they're doing. First, it was from the Latin American countries, increasingly from Africa and everywhere else.
Mm.
The stress it's putting on the social services system, to the point that the people that are going to stop getting welfare checks first are not going to be the new immigrants. They're going to get theirs for a while, because, you know, in this manipulation type of system, it's these new immigrants that are going to be relied on, in a very similar to how the Bolsheviks just moved into Russia and you know, did all this stuff, right? Call themselves a Bolsheviks to pretend they were the majority when they were just the ones with all the guns, right? It's a similar dynamic with the Bolshevization, the cultural Marxism of America. The Americans that were already there, that were kind of, you know, culturally Marxist anyway, or leaning in that direction. And then you bring in all the immigrants. And a lot of these immigrants were coming from countries that have been ravaged by the International Monetary Fund, that were on the front lines of the bogus. It wasn't bogus for them. It was real enough, this East-West conflict, CIA versus KGB and all that stuff. Millions and millions and millions of people died in Latin America from the, you know, the CIA's wars against communism, and, you know, what good did it do? And most of the members of Congress are communists, right? So the point of relevance is the social services will fall apart eventually. And but the only ones that will continue to get welfare checks, only ones for a while anyway, will be the recent immigrants. And then what will happen eventually with a breakdown of essential use services, you know, no electricity, no water, no sewage for 2 or 3 or more days. And then what we're going to see is basically chaos in the streets. And that's, I think that they're going to set it up so it coincides at some level with a large expansion of the wars overseas against Iran or some other countries. And then they're going to bring all that to America, but all this false flag terrorism. And instead of going after the terrorists, which they run anyway, they're going to go after the constitutionalists, the homeschoolers, and you know, people that are conscientious objectors, basically. And they're going to use a lot of these immigrants as their shock troops. They're going to use a lot of these recent immigrants as their thugs, as their henchmen. It's a very Bolshevik. You know what's interesting also, Judith, when people talk about, oh, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, you look what they did to the former Warsaw Pact countries, to what they did to Russia and Ukraine. It's like the millions of people starved. And the bureaucratic inertia too, how people, you know what's interesting too, is people still hope that Brexit will come through, you know? And if they understood the communist mind, where the simplest thing to do in a communist society is the most difficult because it requires initiative, it requires, well, let's look at the inverse of that. You have to ask permission. You have to first want to do something and hope you don't get in trouble for it. Then secondly, there's a superior who has to go along with it, and another superior above that. So there's all these layers of bosses and masters you have to go through to get the simplest thing done. So where bureaucratic inertia kicks in Brexit and the EU is most of the bureaucrats are communist anyway, right? So from that standpoint, forget about the Brexit, forget about the EU breaking up, because they need that in order. It's the global governance you were talking about. Is this, you know, forget about, you know, Agenda 2030. We're talking about, you know, Ukraine level famine. It's books like Hunger Games were written just for the millennials. They were just for the kids today, right? Yeah. It's the people, the Solzhenitsyns and you know, people like that who lived through it. You know, the Red Terror, the mass famine, mass starvation, the gulags. That's what this is all about, which is essentially and fundamentally a reptilian Draco Orion concept, because it's not human. It cannot, by definition, it cannot be human if it oppresses and it culls that many people. And also the way that the medicine today is making it virtually impossible to have like a normal childbirth. And even to the point where these communists that are running around saying, oh, you know, these are just kids too. They're so brainwashed. Oh, you know, in order to save the planet, I'm not going to have any kids. Oh, and all you pregnant women out there that are carrying male babies, you should abort them, right? You should abort them for the planet, for Gaia.
Yeah, but that is what total confusion does to you.
That's what total confusion does. But it's a hive mind parasite, Wedico virus, what the Gnostics called the demiurge, because the consciousness behind that is inhuman. Somebody's gonna, you know, nowadays in public, they're coming out and saying, you know, we need to eat babies to save the planet, right? In any normal society, they would just like kill that person, you know, just get them out of here, you know, just do away with them. But now in this inversion of everything, that's free speech. Oh, you can't offend all these other people and all these other things which you find to be heinous and atrocious, because that's hate speech. But this person is saying they want to eat babies to save the planet, that's free speech. And it's very subjective, and it's what they're doing is in a very Babylonian Orion sense is, this is what we're all about. this is our norm and this is your norm now, right? And if
Yeah.
you don't like it, it's like, well, we're going to do away with you. Because
Yes.
when you look at the history of the communists, the Maoists, all of them,
Yeah.
it's nothing but eradication.
Yeah.
So these
And
people that are into the savior program are like Trump somehow can defeat all that, right? You know
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
He
yeah,
went on.
yeah.
He went
And
on. Is
heaven
gonna.
is a merry-go-round. Yeah, but exactly there is the point where people should ask themselves, where are these concepts really coming from? Eating a baby, yeah, human sacrifice, um, what have you, everything that is the entire pedophilia thing.
Oh, there's street theater now. There's street theater now, Judith, where
Yeah,
these male transgenders pretend that they're pregnant with a baby, and then they do a self-abortion, and
yeah,
they
yeah,
pull a doll that's covered with blood, and that's art. That's protected by the First Amendment, I guess,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
See, everything is an inversion, but
yeah,
because of the Babylonian Talmudic control of the TV, of Hollywood, of the entertainment industry, and how
yeah.
pervasive
But
it is in
but
all
it
these.
doesn't stop there. There is another layer above that, and that
Yes,
is non-human.
that is non-human
Hmm.
because it's inimical to our survival as a species. If we all become sterile, and because of all the glyphosate and everything else, everything in the processed food, we're well on the way towards being sterile anyway. And then on top of that, it wasn't enough that, okay, we have a law now that says that we can abort a baby or murder a baby rather, up to a minute before it's born. That's not
Yeah,
even enough for them. They're saying we want to be able to kill the baby after the mother is
yeah,
born, and the
yeah.
baby's born. And then they use this wordplay, this Orwellian double thing. Oh, it's reproductive health, right? So everything is a word game. Everything is an inversion. Oh, killing a baby after it's born, that's reproductive health. It's the protection, it's to protect the mother. And in the old days, it was the mothers, the women who held society together. After all the wars, after all the famines, it was always the women who held together. And you look at these communist, entity-infested women today, they're not women. These are entity-infested beings who've taken over, rage-filled entities that have taken over biologically female beings, but
Mm.
something else has gone on.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that is the recycling, because these entities come back into these women who are biologically women, but they're essentially born and bred into some of these projects where
Mm.
through trauma, through indoctrination, et cetera, they wind up being this female hating, whatever gender you want to call them. They wind up, rather a male hating, right? Male
Yeah.
hating, baby hating entity that's like as far from being feminine as possible, but that's Babylonian, that's Orion,
Yeah.
that's Zephyrian, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing in our faces now. So this whole thing of MAGA, make America great again, America first. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
If
most likely a different idea than you
yeah,
think.
no, they have to pass that. It's I'm all about solutions. I think it
Mhm.
always starts with the first circle, ourselves, and then covertly, because as time goes on, those people with Alex Jones types and people like him, with the bullhorns, they're there to be fake opposition. They're there to draw people towards them. The real
Mm.
players, the real operators, they don't operate that like that.
No.
Forward, it's much better to be subtle, to be covert, to work behind the scenes, right? You can still do a podcast, you can still have informative shows like this, right?
Yeah.
But you can do it in such a way that you don't draw this big, bullseye on yourself, right? Because that doesn't do you any good, or anyone, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a way to do this so that doesn't piss too many people off,
So to wrap this up, and so that we do not leave everybody hanging in the dumpster, how can we, I mean, there is a multi-layered assault on us. That's a given. Chemtrails, vaccines, poison food, water, what have you. So how can we protect ourselves? What can we actively do to anchor better frequencies?
Again, starts with the first circle, eating the right food. I mean, we only drink the best possible water.
Mm.
You know, there are times unavoidably, if you're thirsty, you're outside of your house, you have to buy a plastic bottle of water somewhere. Okay, I understand that, nothing wrong with that. But in your home, you can drink the best possible water available. In your home, you can have devices and tensor rings and certain orgone pyramids to make your place better frequency wise. You can regulate as much as possible. And like I said, you don't have to meditate all the time to do this, but you know, to some degree it helps. Regulate your thinking, right? How we feel, how we react to certain things. Like when I see something, a transgender person simulating an abortion on stage, right? It doesn't engender a violent reaction within me.
No.
I recognize the nature of the multiple threat environment we're in. That's just another manifestation of it. So to me, something like that is, as much as I am against it, it's water off a duck's back. I'm not going to let an image like that dictate how I feel, dictate how my day goes, because ultimately I'm responsible for my thoughts and my feelings. So, and also how you talk about how you regulate, you know, you don't let these negative influences. I don't watch much TV. If I watch anything, it's an educational, informational thing. I still like certain sports, you know, as a diversion, right?
Yeah.
So there's certain things, I like music, I like to read. There's certain things we can do to detach. I mean, we're in this world, but we're not of it. Remember that, folks, because if you go far enough back in a linear sense, you didn't come from this planet. Okay, you came here to be a systems buster, a paradigm buster, a frequency buster, but you didn't originate here. You came from somewhere else. That doesn't mean I don't have love or feelings towards this planet. I want this planet to heal, right? But we can't do anything about it unless we heal ourselves first. And I'm a work in progress. It's a day-to-day thing. Like when you hear alcoholics say, "Oh, it's a day-to-day thing." Oh, it's a day-to-day thing.
Yeah,
Doing
sure, it is. Yeah, and I'm in the same shoes, but I don't want to be pulled back into that surface level of understanding, because I think we are at a juncture now where proper knowledge of occult workings and understanding is essential.
And a quick point before we end here. October, November, historically, in the UFO ET field, are months of big activity, like some kind of window opens up. And even Crowley talks about November being, you know, the eon of Horus, associated with Mars, the god of war. So the Bolshevik Revolution, for example, right? That October, right? All that. It happened October, November timeframe. So we're, and also, you know, this election cycle is coming around next, you know, next fall or autumn in the Northern Hemisphere. You know, there's going to be more, because as 2020 goes, things are really going to amp up. So it's more than ever, we got to stay grounded. No matter what's going on around us, we have to have that inner calm, that inner peace, like a Shaolin monk, you know.
And a non-reactionary position.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, also, one last thing. For you listeners in Australia, I will be giving a lecture in Byron Bay on November 27th, 28th, Thursday, 27th, I think the date is. I will be giving a lecture there. It's a 2-day conference, and I will be there with 3 other speakers. So if you happen to be in Byron Bay, New South Wales, it's a great venue, and we have a lot of information to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I didn't get through my questions. You have to come back.
Thank you.
Not tomorrow or next week, but
sometimes I kind of get carried away, you know. I get, you know, I'm passionate.
Yeah, that's okay. You know, sometimes it takes a while to develop a thought, and we have all the time. We have no advertisement that is pushing us
Well,
faster,
thank you, and you
faster.
definitely have to come back on my show too. Your
Yeah,
interview will be coming out shortly. There was a backlog in front of it that I had to do first. So
yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay, so this was it, guys. Night flight for today. James and I, we say goodbye. Stay safe and sound and take good care of yourselves. Bye bye.
Bye.